Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Walking Dead. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. The really interesting thing about, obviously, the structuring, I'm sure these episodes are structured the way they are just because of, like, obviously, working, around with, the state of the world and everything. But it brings about interesting storytelling, I think, just because you have to find very, unique stories that kind of tell to kind of work around your current circumstances. I'm curious, I think I was reading an article suggesting that this might be kind of having an effect on, the way The Walking Dead is kind of done even later on, in particular, this next, the final season. But regardless, tangents and all aside, it's interesting because, obviously, we only just got introduced to Princess, a couple episodes ago. We only had, one... technically one episode with Princess, so this episode was kind of all about her. Obviously, the people surrounding them kind of ends up separating Yumiko, Eugene, Ezekiel, and Princess from each other. Princess tried to fight back, and which I was like, luckily it ended the way it did, because we've seen at least with Negan what happens when you fight back and the consequences for that. So luckily things turned out okay on this front to a certain extent. Obviously Princess is stressing out because she's thinking damn it, I messed things up, I did it again. And obviously she hears Yumiko and it's like, oh, you're hurt. She tells a really sad story. Obviously she gets a splinter. And she talks about a time when she was 14, because Yumiko's telling her, don't do this, just do what they say. And even then I thought that was so interesting. I was like, wow, Yumiko telling you not to I guess it was at first I guess it makes sense, but it just didn't seem right at first. But I was like, okay, I'll kind of go with things. But Yumiko being just don't do this, don't mess things up, just kind of keep calm and just do whatever they ask you to. But like I said, Princess ended up telling this sad story about, when she was 14 and her mom and her stepdad, obviously she stayed away from school for a little bit, but her mom made her go back to school even though her head was still kind of messed up from the splinter. She got infected again, pus and stuff oozing out. So when it was a time for dinner, her stepdad was making fun of her about it. And she was saying oh, I was here in this house first, so I get to stay at the dinner table and eat wherever I want to, despite the situation with my hand. He smacked her, and she asked her mom wait, you not what are you going to do about it? Please don't make me eat in the garage alone. And she's like, then don't eat, and that's sad to hear that that's when it ended up happening. That's actually very heartbreaking. But obviously she hears Yumiko on the other side, not responding, and then it sounds like they're grabbing Yumiko. Then she's waiting, but Yumiko never returns, and then all of a sudden she knows, wait, she probably couldn't see it in the dark, but it's oh, there's a hole here. Okay, she pulls the thing off, and she talks to Eugene, which Eugene is kind of, trying to ease her mind to by don't screw this up, don't mess up, you're going to cause problems if you do this. It's Stephanie said, they're good people, they're just vetting us type of situation. And but also for him, it's I need to, as he says, I need to be a cross between Santa Claus and a guardian angel, because my people need me. There's a fight, they're going to need our extra help. The fighting may be over, but regardless, which the circumstances still apply, they're going to need a lot of help, even though the whispers are going. Obviously they don't know that yet, but it's the whispers being gone, they need to replenish a lot of their supplies. Are kind of screwed on many different fronts. So, but you have Princess trying to do the right thing. She's right. I think for her, she probably, especially under the circumstances, she met up with the group. She can kind of be a bit of a screw up, and I think for her, it's just okay, I won't screw up. I'll do what's necessary. So she's kind of playing along. They got a lot of questions. Truth be told, she didn't have many answers to kind of give them anyway, because as a unit, it's only been a week she's been with the group, so she doesn't know that much about them other than their names. But even, and I think that speaks volumes when she's later on, it's see, he referred to you guys as my friends. She was kind of happy about that, because who knows exactly how long she's been on her own in this world. The way she talks about it later on, it seems that's not the case, that she's met with other people as well, that there have been other groups. But I thought it was so fascinating, obviously she didn't give the dude the answer he wanted, and he ended up smacking her. But then later on, Ezekiel arrives, And I was like, oh man, she's so happy. She hugs him and everything. And it's like, oh. But then Ezekiel's like, all right, we got to plan for something else. Then there's also the thing of like, all right, we need to get weapons or something. But once again, Princess like, we don't want to screw things up. Like, Eugene was saying like, maybe we just kind of wait and see how this whole thing plays out. And Ezekiel's kind of like, I'm not going to leave them behind. They're my friends. And she's like, I get they're your friends. You don't have to be an asshole about it. But also like her jaw like hurts a little bit because she says like, that when he hit her, he hit, where her jaw was already fractured. And then she says the most heartbreaking line of like, it's going to heal. It kind of does all the time. And it's like, Jesus, like how many times did he hit her? Or, maybe, one is obviously one too many. But also like the fact is that he fractured her jaw. Either that's from constantly it happening, in a sense that he hit her over and over again until it fractured her jaw. And now her jaw's just always going to be a little like, if she take, any hit to her face, it's going to probably like, it literally, literally opens the wound again to a certain extent, And for both of them to kind of sit down and obviously they, maybe Eugene trusted the wrong people. Because Princess comes from this perspective of kind of like, people suck. But, Ezekiel's kind of saying like, they'll tell you they love you when they don't. Families suck. Not all of them. Most of them do, so. But when the time comes, Princess is like, we're going to handle things this way. It's going to be fine. It's going to be cool. And then Ezekiel smacks the dude. It's in that moment that I start going like, wait, is this what? And it wasn't like, it's just certain points, her interactions with that dude that started making me think, like, especially because it's like, he's behind her. He's not leading the conversation most often than not. He's kind of like the hype man in the conversation. It's like, oh, we're expected to believe you? Like stuff like that. And in that moment, I'm like, he's not acting like Ezekiel. Like Ezekiel's a little more even kilter considering the circumstances. I'm like, that's why I'm like, yeah, something's not right here. In that moment, I was like, wait, does she have like, at first I was about to say multiple personality disorder, but I think the more clinical term nowadays is dissociative personality disorder. Maybe. At first that's what I was kind of thinking. I was like, especially when he says the line, because at first I was trying to pay attention to the conversation. I'm like, is he actually only looking at her or is he looking at Ezekiel? Because that's the thing to look back at if you're like rewatching it. But then he says the line of, I can't let anyone know what happened or don't know I got taken down by a chick. And I was like, right. He didn't say Ezekiel, he said a chick. So it's like, yep, this is all in her head. And then like Ezekiel goes ape shit. I was like, oh, this is her. And she's literally talking to herself to calm down. Because even Ezekiel said a line of like, no one's going to hurt you anymore. And then like he's punching. And he's like, no one's going to hurt me anymore. And in that moment you're like, oh yeah. And then she kind of snaps back to reality, kind of realizing like, oh, there was no little hole in the wall to talk to Yumiko. That was in her head. There was no hole that she could sneak out to go talk to Eugene. That was also in her head. And Ezekiel, there was no thing in the top for Ezekiel to come down in. All in her head. And she's there like having beat home dude down with her bare hands covered in blood. And she kind of leaves. And as she's about to leave, like she's trying to sink away, she's like, no, because she's like, I can't leave them behind. But then Ezekiel's like, come on, you can do this. And kind of talks a little bit about why she is the way she is, kind of saying like, well, because she'd made it clear earlier in the episode, she didn't really like dark kind of confined places. It was all too familiar because what had started the Splinter story was because she kind of, it makes it seem like, I would assume her stepdad, I mean, it could have been him or anyone or a number of people, locked her up to the point she was like, oh yeah, like I had to like pick at the door jam and that's how she got a splinter. Like that's where her current circumstances related in to past events. So I was like, okay, so that's interesting. So it seems like, obviously, this is something that happens from time to time, and it just happens to manifest itself as these people, because I guess these are the people she's gotten attached to lately. But, like, obviously, the version of Ezekiel inside of her head saying, like, I'll just lead them, because it's saying, like, your mom, kind of, she did what she needed to do to survive. She kind of left you to your own vices alone. Because it's essentially like, the conversation that come up earlier where Ezekiel was like, I'm sorry, fear kind of brings out the worst of us. And that's kind of coming back full circle in this regard. Because the entire thing is Princess like bouncing things back and forth between herself, obviously then manifesting as other people. Because you have Yumiko and Eugene telling her not to screw up, but then you have Ezekiel representing the side of her that's like, no, I need to get out of here, getting super agitated, and it's like, I gotta help, I gotta find out answers, even if I screw things up, it's just like, she's literally at war with herself, and, but it's like, the Ezekiel outside is telling her, like, oh yeah, basically, what she was talking to earlier with Ezekiel inside the train, being like, oh yeah, people suck, but it's like, yeah, some people do, like, but, there were good people too, like, kind of saying, like she was kind of referencing, like, maybe different groups she was a part of, but, for her, and she's kind of talking about this group too, they're good people too, so she doesn't want to leave them behind, and then so she kind of goes back, home dude's there, and she's like, yeah, sorry, sometimes I don't know my own truth. He's like, or who are you talking to? Who are you talking to now? She's like, nobody. I mean, you. And then it's like, yeah, so she's like, but I'm not crazy, I mean, yeah, it might be like the ADHD, the PTSD, the crushing loneliness, the imagination I have, and it's like, oh, of her coping. And it was like, okay, so I mean, I don't know if that would clinically still fall under the category of dissociative. I think it still would, because it's like she's creating an image of somebody else. Once again, maybe this is, and I think it's because I think she can normally rein it in. I think it's just the current circumstances of being in a dark, confined place. It just brought up some ugly memories, and it kind of triggered the PTSD inside of her. So she created imaginative versions of everyone that she's gotten close to, all representing like three different sides of her brains, kind of her personality to a certain extent, trying to, once again, literal war with herself. And, it's like, hey, I'm sorry. And she lets the dude go, and it's like, I'm going to keep on holding over this rifle for a little bit longer. But it's like being like, hey, maybe we can smooth things out. Maybe things can work out. He's like, I don't know, man. You've kind of screwed the pooch on this. I've kind of screwed up too. She's like, okay, how about I answer all your boss's questions, then we can kind of work something out. He's like, all right, that will work. And part of him is like, I don't know. I don't trust this dude. Rightfully so. Like, I knew something was just off the way he was handling things. It's like, that's a long con. But I guess he figured, like, she's not in the most stable set mindset. So it's kind of like, maybe knowing that, I mean, I think that speaks volumes that under those circumstances, you figure, like, hey, I can use this as an opportunity. Like, maybe they were listening in and finding out, like, oh, like, she's a little out there. So maybe they figured they can use this. Granted, he didn't realize that she'd, like, he probably thought, like, oh, this is a smaller woman, like, it's not going, oh, and she literally beats the shit out of me. Like, maybe that's kind of what it is. So who knows, they might have been listening in on the conversation she's had with everyone, and they were probably like, oh, she's her mind's a little fractured or broken at the time. So, whatever the case may be, she answers all the stuff. Pittsburgh by way of Sunwon, talks about, like, only having met them a week ago, only knowing their name, not knowing where they're from. And it's like, all right, good. She's like, so when can I see my friends? And he's like, right now. And she's like, okay. Turns, door opens, they're in bags, and he's like, I got her. They put a bag over her head because the whole thing was a ploy. So, because they made that dude was pitching that line of like, hey, basically like, we welcome all those who come to our gates, or some BS like that they're helping people, like. So it makes you wonder, like, obviously that was all Princess's sides of things. Like, what was, I'm assuming Yumiko, Eugene, and Ezekiel didn't say anything. They probably didn't break, but because of her current circumstances, like I said, beating herself up, thinking she's doing the wrong thing, kind of screw the pooch, like, and I think that's a sad thing, because for her, it's like, she, especially considering the circumstances under which they met, she was trying to do the right thing of, like, regardless, they came back for me, so I gotta come back for them, and I don't blame her. It's just, I mean, they created these circumstances because I think it's meant to trigger stuff. It's meant to trigger people so that they can get responses out of them. Once again, we don't know what the other said, but now basic question once again, obviously Stephanie potentially set this all up. So once again, is this the same Republic group from the world beyond? Is it a different group entirely? Like, I mean, granted, they didn't kill anybody, so they're just holding everybody hostage, but it's like, well, you got some information out of Princess, not enough, because obviously, she's like, well, you already know their names. It's like, no, Princess probably was the one that ended up telling him everyone's name of like Yumiko, Ezekiel, and Eugene. It's like, no, like they didn't know everyone's name until she said anything. The only reason why they know Yumiko's name is because she kept saying it over and over again. So, but like I said, I thought that's an interesting development to kind of create for that character, considering the apocalypse, because she even talks about it. It's like, what is age in the apocalypse? Where you're from? Like, what does that matter in the apocalypse? It's like from everywhere and all over. You age like 150 years in the apocalypse. Like having been alive this long in the apocalypse, everyone's about like 150 years old. Is kind of her thought, but it's just like I said, she's a little. Obviously, when you meet her, it was kind of like, oh, she's a little crazy. Like that little tidbit of when they first met her at the end of an episode and then spending an entire episode, you're like, oh, she's a little off a rocker. But, like, I think it's interesting to kind of see, like, I think the solitude of just kind of everything, like her background, plus the world going up in flames and becoming, the apocalypse. Just everything kind of it wears you down, and we don't know her full circumstances. Like, was she always like this, like I said, or was it the apocalypse that really triggered it? Like, this might have been something she was already kind of always. I don't know. I just thought that was so fascinating. It brings a very interesting element to her character going forward. I mean, that probably is also where Princess comes from, because it's like that's her way of kind of coping. Because she'd actually talked about like, oh yeah, like the fort. She's like, oh, I'm wondering about those other kids, like, because she talked about the one that actually taught her to dye her hair. And she's like, oh yeah, and that changed my life. And she was like, yeah, I'm kind of wondering where she is, her and the other people, like, if they made it or not, So it's interesting. I thought it was, like I said, I got there partway through the episode wondering like whether this was all in her head. Turns out it is. I was like, that's so fascinating. Let's tell you what that means for a character like that going forward under these circumstances. Like, can you ever 100% trust what you're seeing as being real? I mean, granted, she's not the first character that's ever had hallucinations in this universe. Not even in this show alone. Obviously, like, I think the last person I'm thinking of off the top of my head was Rick. He was wounded and was seeing a lot of shit. So I think that's the last one I can think of in this show. But I mean, it's happened in Fear the Walking Dead as well. So it's just interesting. I'm really curious to see where things take us going forward. I believe there's only 2 bonus episodes left. So obviously we won't find out where some of these storylines are going to end up until like the new season starts. So. But it's still just kind of nice, like in between, I guess, almost like as if you're going by video game terms, it's nice flavor text, a little background you probably normally wouldn't get. Once again, I don't know if these stories would have existed in the new season or not. Maybe they took little fragments of ideas they had for potential for the 11th season and then just kind of put, like I said, I think at the time when the bonus episodes were announced, I don't think they had even started any pre-production on 11 yet. I don't think they had really worked out what they wanted for the 11th and final season. So like I said, maybe these were kind of ideas they had floating around of like, yeah, they were probably going to fuse these with other episodes, but they're like, no, let's just expand these out and kind of give these episodes themselves as breathing room, as bonus episodes. Once again, I don't know the whole behind the scenes of these, but I'm like I said, I'm curious like whether these were just something they came up on the spot with, or were these ideas they had for season 11 initially, but they kind of decided, oh, we'll push these for now, and they kind of go a little bit of a different direction with season 1. Either way, I'm really interested to see where things end up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.